Bart Phillips is a native-born Houstonian. Raised in a conservative Baptist family, he grew up believing in heaven and hell, angels and demons, and that the evil Soviet Union was suppressing evidence that Noah's Ark had actually been found on Mount Ararat during World War II. He was even proud to be elected chaplain, not captain, of his high school football team. He entered Houston Baptist University as an endowed academic scholar, which spawned rude jokes even on a Christian college campus. He was recruited by the Christian Life office at HBU to become part of their student-led revival team. During this time, he was a lead singer of a Christian rock band called The Peculiar People. And he served as minister of youth at Emmanuel Baptist Church and youth choir director at Memorial Baptist Church, both in Houston. After successfully indoctrinating dozens, if not hundreds, of Houston area teenagers, he transferred to East Texas Baptist University in Marshall, Texas, to fulfill his dream of becoming a missionary and indoctrinating young people all over the world. After bumping his head rather hard on some overhanging reality, he changed his major to education and English. He graduated with a BS in education and spent the next 8 years BSing in education, trying and failing to get high school kids to appreciate Shakespeare, Chaucer, Dickens, Hawthorne, Emerson, and even Emily Dickinson, although they almost all liked Mark Twain. He has since sought asylum in the private sector and spends his days babysitting 350 computer servers scattered across 6 continents. He has been married for nearly 30 years, and quite coincidentally, so has his wife, April. He has 2 daughters, Alyssa and Amber, whom he has followed, photographed, and filmed relentlessly all of their lives, and he is happy to show you the pictures. Do not hesitate to ask. Although he is not a lawyer and has never played one on TV, he has recently had to learn a lot about the constitutional principle of church-state separation following a recent tragedy at his daughter's high school. So let's welcome to the podium our good friend Bart Phillips.
The saddest thing about the bio is it's all true. I'm a native of the South, as was mentioned in there. And if you haven't figured it out for those from other parts of the world, down here we tend to come in 2 speeds. There's laid back and there's NASCAR. Buckle up. Now I need to go back. Hit the button left. You saw the quote there at the beginning about the wall. And what wall are we talking about there? This is an interactive discussion. Short answer, please, because we're on a time schedule. Separation of church and state. And this is where the phrase comes from. Thomas Jefferson. Now, what I think is really funny about that, and you can read much of it for yourself, I added the bold, is the date. So, Tom, what are we going to do for New Year's this year? I don't know. I think I'll write a letter to a bunch of Baptists in Danbury, Connecticut, and explain a portion of the First Amendment to them. But that's where it comes from. So, how many of you recall a case of a high school student suing her school district to have a prayer removed from the wall of the auditorium in her school? Anybody remember that case? And that was who? Jessica Alquist. And that case was Alquist versus the city of Cranston, Rhode Island, filed a couple years back. But that is not the case I'm talking about. Anybody know another case just like it? Anybody heard of this one? Jane Doe versus Aldine Independent School District, 1982. Jane Doe was an anonymous student at Aldine High School the same time that my wife was a student at Aldine High School. And her dad was on the school board. Jane Doe sued to have these words removed from the wall above the entrance to the school auditorium. That's pretty out there, right? That's pretty obvious. This wasn't just any prayer. This was the Aldine school song in 1982. When the football team took the field and the band played the school song, the cheerleaders, the drill team, and most of the people in the crowd, rather than locking pinkies or swaying back and forth or bear pawing or hook 'em horns or whatever, they bowed their heads. Young students sued. One, the words were removed. The school song had to be changed. And April was on the other side of the fight at this time, as was her father, and they were furious. Those evil atheists out to destroy the world. So my question is this, kind of the topic of the day. If the matter took place 30 years ago and it was decided by a U.S. District Court that it is illegal to post a prayer on the wall of a high school auditorium in a public school, why did Jessica Alquist have to fight the same fight 30 years later? Why does that stuff still continue, right? Still happens in schools. And there's a good reason for it, right? Yeah, we happen to have a high school history teacher and a lawyer in the crowd, so if you get stuck, don't ask them, it's cheating.
Selective memory?
Well, the problem is this, and it's simple, and it's a feature, not a bug, of our constitutional system. There's no prior review. When a government body decides to do something, they simply can. They simply can. They can do it. If nobody complains, they can keep doing it. Government can basically make and pass laws all they want, and if nobody raises a stink, they stand until they are challenged. All right. Anybody recognize this expression, these words? Have you seen them before? Where have you seen them? It's okay to speak up. I have a little hearing impediment, so if you don't speak loudly, I will not hear you.
First sentence of the First Amendment.
Yeah, it's from the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. You know that Constitution that's enjoying such a love fest these days, people carrying around little copies, hoping to run into some of the framers so they can get perhaps an autograph or something. One would think from all the talk you hear about the Constitution that somehow it was, inspired by God and handed down, etched on the side of Liberty Bell to the founding fathers as they prayed in supplication on top of a mountain while Washington and the troops huddled down in Valley Forge below in their bloodied shoes and tattered coats. Of course, that is not at all what happened. Notice there's 16 words. It's not a very long expression. Divides into two chunks. You have the Establishment Clause. You have the Free Exercise Clause. So when you start running into the legalese of this, you'll see those terms a lot. So where did it come from? That's kind of an open-ended question, what we're going to pursue some today. Who wrote it? What were they trying to accomplish? And I love this expression. What was their original intent? Yes, sir?
I don't speak legalese very well. Can you translate that? Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion. Can you translate that to me in plain English?
Well, actually, you don't get the benefit of any kind of translation. Again, the joy of not being a lawyer was that I only have the words to go on. What ultimately happens in a court of law, in a lawsuit, is what do those words mean? Now, obviously, we got some kind of conceptual words like, what does a law respecting mean? What does respecting mean? Mm-hmm. Lots of challenges with it, especially when you consider that it is inherent in language that words change meanings. Just go out and read like an email from a teenager. Words do not continue to mean the same things they once did. I love the expression original intent because it's a favorite argument. What was the original intent of this? Well, I think there's a certain naivete that goes into asking that question. And it's the first thing I want to address. Okay, this is where we begin. So now, here we go. We're going to have a quick quiz to query your constitutional quotient. If you know the answer, just shout it out. When was the Constitutional Convention held? You can't ask April.
1789.
Close.
87.
1787. Where?
Philadelphia.
State House in Philadelphia. Now, why was the Constitutional Convention convened?
That's the Articles of Confederation.
That's it. The great mysteries, they didn't go there to write a constitution. They went there to rewrite the Articles of Confederation. So if you're going to go back to original intent, the original plan was we're just going to change what we already have. Someone subverted that plan. That was the plan. All right, continue. How many states sent delegates to this convention? How many states were there?
13.
13. How many sent delegates? 12. Rhode Island wanted absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with the process. So already, original intent means everybody but Rhode Island. How many total delegates attended? Just guess. If you don't know, just guess.
24.
55%. Although they were never actually all there together at the same time. Some arrived, got fed up, and went home. One state, their delegation didn't arrive till the whole thing was halfway over. How many stayed to the bitter end? Out of 55,
5. Virginia.
to a 42. Now here's where you get it. Here's the fun. 42 people were still there debating on the last day. How many signed it?
First day? John Hancock.
How many agreed to it?
39. 3 people in the room said, you're not giving us what we want. We objected this whole process. They refused to sign. So when you start asking the question, original intent, you got a problem already because you had 55 people show up, only 39 were willing to sign. How many of them were really happy with the end product? None of them. When Washington was interviewed by CNN afterwards about what he thought of the final product, his words were, it is the result of 4 months deliberations, which is war hero speak for if you got nothing to say something blatantly obvious. Now the tough part. You hear this expression all the time. The framers of the Constitution. I always get a visual image of a guy with a little tack hammer. The framers of the Constitution. I'll warn you up front. The average educated person can name 4 of the 39. No smartphones allowed. No consulting the person who's heard this presentation over and over again for the last 2 weeks. My history teacher wife, who's had to correct me on a number of factual errors.
Cecil Romney.
How many framers can you name? Throw out a name.
Madison.
Jefferson was not one of them. Jefferson was actually a minister to France at the time. He was in Paris making time with Sally Hemings. It's true.
John Adams.
Somebody mentioned Ben Franklin. Ben Franklin by this time, he is one of them. Franklin was old enough by this time to be the great-grandfather of our country. He was in his 80s. He actually plays a very minimal role until one final thing which we'll talk about. Who else? That's one.
Madison.
James Madison, the big cheese. Madison is interesting because Madison is considered to be the primary author. He's the one, he showed up early, 3 weeks before everybody else was supposed to show up. He set up shop. He positioned himself to kind of be the greeter, to start forming coalitions. Because while the Constitution Convention was held to rewrite the Articles of Confederation, James Madison wanted to throw it all out and produce something new. And he had to get a lot of help to do that. So he arrives early. What's also interesting about him, I don't know if you know this, but the Constitutional Convention was held in complete secrecy. They nailed the windows shut so no one could open them so that bypassers could not hear what was going on. They were under orders not to keep a diary. Madison pushed it, and Madison kept a diary, which is the only way we really know what happened. By the way, because he kept it, he comes off sounding really, really good during the process. Who else was there? We had 2.
Alexander Hamilton.
Hamilton was there. Hamilton's story is interesting. Hamilton was from the state of New York. When New York learned they are not going to rewrite the Articles of Confederation, they instead are going to throw it out and do something else. New York attempted to recall their delegates. Hamilton, quoting the 10th Doctor Who, said, "I don't want to go." A few Whovians in the crowd. And he didn't. So that later Washington would say the Constitution was written by 11 states and Colonel Hamilton. All right, we need one more. Adams at the time was minister to England. He was in London. Who else can we name? Think of founding fathers.
Thomas Paine.
Thomas Paine was, I think at the time, Thomas Paine had already gone to France, stirring up a revolution over there. So when people talk about the framers, it gets real hard. George Washington was the one we had named. George Washington was brought in. He was unanimously elected president of the convention for one purpose: to give it gravitas. The funny thing is, in the whole process, he almost never says anything. The only time he's recorded as speaking was when some private papers came up missing. Now, Ben Franklin, like I said, he was so old, they had to carry him in. There was a prison just down the street, and they'd send prisoners to carry Franklin into the room. And there was Alexander Hamilton. That's it. Can anybody name another signer? No smartphones. It's tough. You probably haven't heard of anything. Hancock got busy with his shipping business and did not participate. The other notables that were there, Patrick Henry, wanted nothing to do with it. He said he smelled a rat in Philadelphia. So, these are some other key players in the Constitution. Charles Pinckney, you probably never heard of him. He's from South Carolina. I think it's kind of curious here, don't you think? He's from South Carolina, and he's the one who insists there shall be no religious test to hold office in the U.S. William Paterson, my wife asked me, "Are you sure it's spelled that way?" Well, if not, then the university named after him got him wrong too. He proposed the plan of, well, we should all be represented equally by state. Madison wanted a proportional representation based upon population. That was good for Virginia. It was the most populous state at the time. Along comes a simple cobbler from Connecticut by the name of Roger Sherman, one of two people that actually signed all three of the most important documents in our history. Sherman proposed this notion, well, let's have the House be proportional by population, the Senate, 2 for every state. They actually debated that number over and over again. There was, of course, the infamous Daniel of St. Thomas Jenifer, who you probably never heard of, and I put him up here because he's got a weird name. That's pretty much it. He was a senior statesman, a friend of Ben Franklin, the oldest guy, second oldest guy there. And John Dickinson. Dickinson's story is great. In 1776, Dickinson was the primary opponent of the revolutionary cause. He did not want to declare independence. Here, Dickinson, who's moved to get away from those other people in Pennsylvania that he didn't seem to like, he now is the person who says people will never buy into the Constitution unless you let them actively participate in electing the president. There's a great myth out there, I love the myth, that the framers of the Constitution trusted the common people. Codswallop. They didn't. The whole Constitution is based upon building structures between the common man and the actual decision-making process. Dickinson fought real hard. The compromise gave us the Electoral College. And whether you know it or not, even when you vote, those electors, when they assemble at Boston each year, can vote however they want. So your vote can potentially mean nothing. All right, so how did they accomplish this thing? How did they get it done? Well, there was a lot of compromise. Back before this was an ugly word. It was a difficult process, but it was something that people were accustomed to doing. Nailing the windows closed probably helped. At least the smell encouraged them to find some common ground. They focused on broad concepts instead of little particulars people like to fight over. They keep doing that, don't I? They were basically sequestered in Philadelphia before air conditioning in the middle of the summer for 4 months.
Cool.
I think there's a cure in some of our congressional woes these days. Let's build housing, attach it to. You are in your room or you are in there debating until it's done. Vote and then you can go out.
No AC.
Go to a restaurant. Just a plan, I don't know, thought. There was lots of rum. At the time, the per capita consumption of alcohol was significantly higher than it is today. They adjourned every day about 3 o'clock, went down to local pubs, went into back rooms, and they all got, well, they drank a lot of rum. That's the story. And in the end, when they finally got down to the final vote, Ben Franklin, very frail at this time, wanted to present this appeal. Please, we need to have unanimity. We want to show a unanimous space. He was so ill, he couldn't speak. So he turned to for his final appeal, he wrote it out. And it was delivered by his friend, Wilson. Sorry, Wilson. Sorry, it's actually James Wilson, considered one of the greatest legal minds of his time, who would sign both the Declaration and the Constitution, and would be a member of the first Supreme Court. So, the Constitution passes, sent to the states for ratification. Delegates all go home. Madison, who has opposed the addition of anything to his masterpiece, which again was a product of a whole lot of compromise to begin with, goes back to Virginia. Now, a number of delegates, I mentioned that 3 delegates, even at the end, refused to sign the thing, and it was because there was no Bill of Rights. They felt as though they were giving away too much to the federal government. My wife said I should use the term anti-federalist. There you go. So Madison opposes this. He goes back to Virginia, and he arrives back home. People find that people in Virginia have objections to this thing because it doesn't include this. So Madison does the first documented instance of being for it after he was against it. He simply changes his position. If anybody's gonna start messing up my Constitution, it's gotta be me. He publicly states that if he is elected, the very first thing that he will do is to repeal Obamacare. That he will propose a Bill of Rights. All right, now, Bill of Rights, here we go. Next test. We have an instant exam of your amendment acumen. It's alliterative. Okay, play. This one's harder. How many amendments did Madison propose?
12.
Good guess. It's more. 20. Who said that? Yay! 20 was it to go. It's roughly 20 because he proposed them in a very different way than we're used to seeing them. He proposed in-text changes. Change this line to say this. He wanted to throw out the whole preamble, that whole, we the people of the United States that we all had to memorize. He didn't want us to memorize that. He wrote a new one and proposed 20 changes in text. Change this line, change these words. Of course, that gets handed off to the committee in the House. They condensed it down to 17. Those 17 are sent over to the Senate. The Senate gets them in committee, and they condense them down to
18.
That sounds like a Senate kind of thing to do, doesn't it? 12. With the idea that these are going to be standalone that will be placed at the end of the document instead of changes. They wanted to protect the integrity of the original document. So, how many of those 12 amendments were finally ratified? Most people think 10. We come to know those as what? The Bill of Rights. The correct answer to the question, as I phrased it, is 11. 10 were passed by 1791. One of them, now the 27th Amendment, was passed in 1992. So it started back with Madison proposing it, and it got passed when George Bush Sr. was president. So the question is, was there ever original intent? If we're going to figure out what this means, what do we do with this concept? What did they mean by it? Well, the problem is there were a lot of authors. There were committees. There were debates. Not all states played along. Not all votes were unanimous. When it was all said and done for the Constitution itself, nearly a third of the delegates walked out, most of them because they were fed up with the process before it ever reached the final vote. There never was that moment of solidarity when they locked arms and sang Kumbaya, Yankee Doodle. It never happened. So if you're going to go back and talk about how, the framers and whatever else, just who exactly are you talking about? There's a further problem. So they passed the First Amendment. It goes out to the states for ratification. They then settle into the business of creating rules for themselves. We got to have offices within the House and the Senate, organize, do this and that. One of the very first proposals they made was, we want to create an office called the Chaplain of the House and Chaplain of the Senate. Anybody see a problem with that? To make no law concerning the establishment of religion. And one of the very first laws they passed was, we want to create religious offices in the House and the Senate. A lot of opinions, the whole story too long to tell. It eventually did pass because they tied it to a bill that also allowed them to get paid. Just like today, stick it in there somewhere else, and it passed. Madison was extremely unhappy. That's what he said. The establishment of the chaplainship to Congress is a palpable violation of equal rights as well as constitutional principles. This was a no, I don't think that's right. This was real clear. The tenets of the chaplains elected by the majority shut the door of worship against the members whose creeds and consciences forbid a participation in that majority. He also opposed, by the way, because this has come up recently, he opposed the creation of chaplains in the military. He did go on to say, do we have any former Navy people? Okay, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for about what I'm about to say. It's a joke. But he did make an exclusion. Perhaps it was more important that with the Navy being sequestered at sea and other things, perhaps a chaplain was more understood. They might need to confess more sins. It was the type of thing he said. So what does all that mean? Well, that's the phrasing we have to work with. Sort of. It doesn't mean what it seems to say. And it's taken thousands of court cases, lawsuits, literally hundreds and hundreds, dozens of Supreme Court cases to finally come up with something that you can walk out of here with. I didn't know much of this when the few events I'm going to talk about later happened. So I had to go and learn this. Google is your friend. 3 tests. Okay, these are things you need to just be aware of. When your teacher, your child sends home an assignment that you have a question, is this proper? When your student in a high school choir is having a concert that's going to be given at a church, or they're talking about the notion of having prayer at the graduation, how do you know what's right and wrong? These are the standards created by the courts. These are things that you can take out with you. Now, the limit test is probably the most difficult one to deal with. So we'll start there and we'll move past it real quick. It comes from a case in 1971, Limit versus Kurtzman. It was all about compensating Catholic schools for their expenses for educating public school students in their schools. It was a complicated case. The end result were 3 questions to determine whether something was constitutional or not. The first question, does this policy or practice have a non-religious purpose? When there is a public prayer at a high school football game, does it have a non-religious purpose? If not, it fails this test. Is the primary effect of the policy or practice one which neither advances nor inhibits religion? Let's look at it from another side. True story. If an art teacher gives an assignment, it's pretty open-ended, and the student wishes to use a religious topic for the work of art that is otherwise fulfills the rest of the assignment, can the teacher say, no, you can't do that? Well, not under this test, because that is an expression of inhibiting religion. The teacher needs to say, these are the standards, this is the assignment, meet the assignment, and take a totally neutral approach to that. This last one gets really complicated because there's two words in here that don't seem to mean much of anything. Does this constitute an excessive entanglement with religion? Well, what's excessive? Is watching 3 football games on a Sunday excessive? Yes and no's. I knew it would be like, no, not really. Well, yes, it is. And what's entanglement? It's a vague expression. Probably the best case of this is the current case with the town of Greece versus Holloway, in which two people, this is going on right now, and the Supreme Court decision heard arguments in November, expected to release a finding sometime after the new year. But basically they come up with this little plan to have ministers come and say this prayer, and these were not non-sectarian, these were fire-breathing kinds of prayers. And the town had kind of conspired with this group of ministers to do this. Is that excessive entanglement? I don't know. Sounds like it to me. That's the limit test. A little more complicated. There was a case that came up after that, years later, and there were a lot of justices that didn't like that test. One of those was Sandra Day O'Connor. This is the one to use. One, Sandra Day O'Connor was considered centrist. The previous one was done by Brennan, I think, and he was considered a liberal judge. Sandra Day O'Connor is more respected. It's also simpler. This was a case that was also won by the church side of it, but it resulted in these two questions as a standard. Does this government practice communicate a message of endorsement or disapproval of religion? Does posting a prayer on the wall above the auditorium communicate a message of endorsement of religion? Well, yeah. Does prayer at a school board meeting communicate endorsement of religion? Yeah. The second question, does the government practice send a message to non-adherents that you are not as welcome, and to adherents of this that you're somehow an insider, you're preferred? First time I spoke before a spring school board, just before the community participation time, where I'm going to tell them we got too much religion in our school, we need to stop doing this, they had moved the official invocation to just before that. How does it make you feel when just before you stand up and speak, and you already got nerves, that a clergyman in a dark suit stands up in front, implores the audience to pray, and now the next thing is you're going to get up and say we shouldn't be doing that? Does that give you a sense that you're not quite as welcome?
Burn the witch.
It certainly did. The endorsement test, you get an assignment from a teacher, you're kind of curious. Well, does this activity endorse religion? And does it send a signal you're not as welcome if you don't believe what we believe? And then there's this last one, and it's not really a test, it's called the coercion test or coercion standard. Excuse me. At a minimum, this is Justice Anthony Kennedy in a very recent case, 1992. Can outside religious figures come in and lead prayers at graduations? The court said no. At a minimum, the Constitution guarantees that government may not coerce anyone to support a religion or its exercise. So, I want to talk about a recent incident that happened, and then we'll conclude here shortly. This is how I got involved in this. September 4th of this year, the 6th day of school, just as students were moving off to class at my daughter's high school, Spring High School. There was a fight. A weapon was drawn. a blind slash, critical wound. Within minutes, young man was dead. From everything I can see of the incident, officials in the school reacted as quickly as they could, were on the scene in seconds. First aid was administered, perpetrator was caught, witnesses were secured, the crime scene was secured. Students were thrown into lockdown. So from inside the school, they did all they could do as far as I know. The reaction outside the school was very different. Of course, the media rushed to the scene, they got the word. There were 2 helicopters hovering the school, there were news crews in front of the principal's office, they were all forced off the campus, by the way, they're just outside. Media was there. Parents who heard about this from their kids, because the school district took more than 3 hours to send out any notification whatsoever. So parents are hearing about it from smartphones. Pictures are being tweeted. I heard about it from a teacher whose husband works there, who called a teacher who works with her. We instantly knew Amber was safe and everything was fine. Parents gathered, they had this breakdown in communication, which of course, when they did talk, when your news story at 6 o'clock is the chief of police at Spring ISD spoke for 71 seconds today, then you've sent the wrong message. But they kind of developed this animosity towards the press. Parents grew frustrated, and it's at this point, this last one's kind of my opinion, that they kind of turned to religion as a shield, as a tool. So, here we go. We're going to use those questions we just talked about to analyze just a couple of incidents. Sorry. The first one, Friday morning, 2 days after the event, there was a meeting at the school officials, and a group known as the Spring Ministerial Alliance. I had never heard of it. It took literally an open records act to find out what this was. In the state of Texas, superintendents are encouraged to create advisory committees in the community. Our superintendent has one that's only made up of ministers. I asked the question in my email, doesn't this constitute some sort of entanglement? Has this been referred to your legal department? The answer I got was great. We don't have a legal department.
Wow.
That's what I got. They had a meeting. The meeting included prayer. It was closed to just school officials and the ministers in this group. Now, there are all kinds of things wrong about this. I will say this. I will excuse some of what happened in these days because they reacted to a crisis they were totally unprepared to manage. All kinds of things happened. We know that later on they announced we had a meeting this morning with all these pastors and we had a prayer together. Well, there's the public endorsement. They just not said that. Been a little more excusable. Afterwards, now, how we heard about this was kind of interesting. We woke up Friday morning, curious what's going on in our school. School had been canceled. On the news, they announced Spring ISD will have a news conference today where the superintendent will appear with 50 pastors. There's so many things wrong about that. You know, it just is. They did have that news conference in which they intentionally created kind of a tableau, the principal, the superintendent, the board president, surrounded by a bunch of clergy. I'll show a picture in just a second. These are some of the things that happened in it. It was presided over entirely by a pastor, by a minister. He's on the news all the time. I don't want to defame anybody. His name is James Dixon. He was on the news, Channel 11 News on Thursday. A lot of things happened. There were these, we need to pray and so on. I can excuse all that, but this was the only press conference where the school took questions from the press. The only one. This is what it looked like, and this is how one local paper portrayed it on their website. Almost all of those people in the picture are ministers. There were other things that happened. They were all reactions to this. But when it became a pattern, they started inviting clergy to be in the hallways to provide support. There were announcements for the 2 Christian groups at the school began to appear there were new posters on the wall. This is when I felt like it was time to step in. The principal sent out an announcement home about see you at the poll. See you at the poll is a trademark of the Baptist General Convention of Texas. Even they say school administrators cannot support this group. That's under the Equal Access Law. This was the thing that finally tilted it. What tilted it for me was not the press release or the picture, but then when they had a meeting of about 70 students in school, at the end of the meeting, they didn't shoot any pictures in the whole meeting. My daughter Amber was one of those students. At the end, they got this bishop, who is a well-known community leader, put him by the door, and all the students had to shake his hand and have their picture taken on their way out. And that was the thing that pushed me over the edge. They were using our students to promote a message that I didn't agree with. So I wanted to send some messages, simple. Religion is not the cure. Religion is divisive. I'm not against religion, but I am in favor of First Amendment protections. How do you make diversity in any organization? Don't take a side. That's how you have diversity. I want them to know someone's going to speak up, and it just isn't okay. Wrote email, I sent messages, I spoke during this, and other than some rather stunned looks from some board members, it's like, I can't believe you just actually said some of these things. I was pretty much ignored. They made a mistake of praying, though, in the board meeting I attended. And all current case law supports the position that school board prayer is unconstitutional. And those are 3 recent cases. So I turned to FFRF, right? Sarah, our friend FFRF, sent a letter on my behalf that said, you need to discontinue this practice. I signed up to speak again. When I arrived, they met me, said, oh, by the way, we're not going to have invocation anymore. We're just going to have a moment of silence. Mission accomplished. So what can we do? Prevent such things from happening for our future free thinkers. We have a number of them. To your neighbor, to people you don't know. I mean, the truth is, all students ought to be able to attend public schools, right? Free of coercion, free of institutionalized endorsement of religion. What do we do? Well, 2 words, and they come from Harry Potter. Any guesses, Potter fans? No, it's not Avada Kedavra. That's the killing curse for those of you. Constant vigilance. Constant vigilance. 30 years ago, someone filed to have a prayer removed, and someone had to do it again 30 years later. We all need to be watchdogs. No, I'm not saying we all need to be activists. I'm not an activist, I'm a reactivist. Keep this in mind, watchdogs are going to be cute and friendly, so be civil when you're fighting for civil protections. Watchdogs do not roam wild. I'm not attacking religion. I want to protect the civil liberties of all the students in my school. Watchdogs are not pack animals. They tend to be isolated. I'm not saying that we as an organization need to mobilize. I'm saying we as individuals need to all be good, responsible citizens. So what are the qualities of watchdog? And we'll end with these real quick. Watchdogs are aware. Those of you who are dog owners, you know when you got a good watchdog. They can be sound asleep, strange sound. The ears pop up, the eyes open. Something seems amiss, what do? They check it out. One thing you do, find the agenda and minutes of your school system. Make a link to it, just look. See what's going on. It's simple, they have to publish these things. Watchdogs are visible. A watchdog that's not visible is not watching anything. A watchdog you never see doesn't deter anything. So be involved, and if you can, be out. I'm glad my school board knows there's an atheist in my school district, and he's going to call us on everything. Because they're going to think, what's he going to say? Is he going to contact all those crazy lawyers at FFRF again? Watchdogs know when to bark. And they also know when not to. There's a time to make a bit of a mess. The early stuff, the reaction stuff, did not concern me nearly so much as when it seemed evident that they were intent on continuing it. If it's okay for a teacher to know there's a PK, what's a PK? A preacher's kid in the class. It might also be helpful if they know there's an AK or SK or HK or maybe a OK. Sometimes watchdogs bite. FFLRF gave me teeth. When you get a letter, a legal, and a letterhead, and all the legalese signed by a lawyer, you go out their website and see that they take great pleasure in suing government entities that violate First Amendment protections. They reacted really quickly. They gave me teeth. And last thing, watchdogs are not just in it for themselves. Biggest thing I struggle with in our movement is there's a whole lot of, so what's in it for me? You will never find a dedicated theist ask that question. It's always about a bigger picture. We have to have a sense of family, of community, and layers reaching out, a sense of responsibility beyond that. So, keep watch on the wall.